Welcome, Antony.
Hello, how are you?
I'm great, man. Great to see you. Welcome, and thanks for participating on our Leaders Who Care series. And I mean, all I know about what you do, you definitely, although you played hard to get at the beginning to get you on the series, but I'm glad we finally got you on. So thanks for being on. And if you could do me a favor, let's start like this. If you could briefly introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, a little bit, not everything, and then we'll chat.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't playing hard to get, of course. Unfortunately, my days are packed, and I have a friend called Neil Sahota on my shoulder all the time, reminding me. So, thanks to Neil, by the way, for kicking my ass and keeping me in gear. But yeah, my name is Antony Randall. I'm the co-founder of an organization called Planet Home. We set out to try to bridge the gap between culture, technology, environment, and economics, so that we could get a balance between how we live on the planet.
Yeah, tell us about where you're from, family. Give us a little bit of stuff no one else knows.
Yeah, I'm actually from England. I grew up in the west of England, just outside London, in a town called Slough in Berkshire. I actually lived in Windsor and Slough for the first sort of 18 years of my life. I'm still really a sort of Slough and Windsor boy. Always will be. You know, they say you can take the kid out of Windsor, but you can't take Windsor out of the kid. So yeah, I grew up in sort of Berkshire, just outside London. I moved to London to study when I was just out of high school, which was 19. And I moved into sound engineering. So I did that, studied that through my early 20s, like 21, 22. And I left school, university in England, school in America. Always get them two things confused. And I went into engineering, and I became a sound engineer for the very first part of my career. I started in theatre. So my first job was at CAT. Well, actually, my first job was at the Royal Opera House in London. I moved from there to CAT. I did that for a few years. And then I decided to go traveling. So I went traveling for a while. And I just kind of came back and fell into engineering and technical direction. So I spent the very first part of my life in London working in theatre and live music, really kind of building shows, producing shows, from theatre shows to music shows. And I did that all the way through really the 90s. So that's kind of where I'm from. I'm from Berkshire in England. And up until 2000, I kind of did a bunch of personal travel. I did a small amount of work travel, but I didn't really travel for work until a little later.
So we talked about this a little bit. You came from the fast-paced, exciting, experiences, music and events and everything, to now co-founding Planet Home. And it seems like throughout this whole journey, you're always looking to create a positive space for people to engage and experience together, and now for a way of living better. So before we get even more into that, can you share like why do you do what you do?
Yeah, so actually the inspiration came from when I was in my teens. I kind of lived between two towns, one Slough and Windsor, and in Slough they had this festival every year. It was called the Slough Festival, and back then I'd sort of become the local sort of DJ at sort of 12, 13, and I'd started doing these events for my school. And I quickly fell in love with putting sound systems together because I didn't have any money. And so I used to kind of piece these little sound systems together when I was at school to do these parties. And we'd have like 200-300 kids, and I would DJ with my friends, and I'd get my mum to do the food, and I'd get my dad to do the door, and I kind of started this little business when I was at school. And one year they had this Slough Festival, and Slough Festival took place actually in the same park that Guy Fawkes takes place in England. And for those that aren't familiar, is that November the 5th in England is Guy Fawkes night. So we have this huge, it's a bit like July the 4th, but it's specifically just for fireworks. And actually every year in this one park, it's the largest park in Berkshire, in our town, and in the surrounding towns, they would do this big firework festival, and they'd have like 20, 30,000 people show up. Wow. And then that year, I was doing this party in, this is 1985. So you can imagine the music was this weird fusion of hip hop and house and, and kind of was ex-punk revival. So like I had this very eclectic, and I grew up loving music. I've just always loved music. And so I was playing this super weird collective music, and we had 300-400 kids in this little hut at the top of the field, this park. And then Slough Festival took place in the same field that the Guy Fawkes would take place, that we'd have like 10, 20, 30,000 people. And they had like 1,500 people. And this was put on by like the city. And I was like, couldn't understand it. I was like, they put all this really fancy gear up, and it was a real production, and they had real engineers, and I was like, but they only had 1,500 people, and I couldn't figure it out. I had 350 people in a hut in the corner of this field, and they could only, with all their money and their resource, put 1,500 people in there. And I was walking back up, and it was at the bottom of this big slope in this big field. And I was walking back up from that. I was like 12, 13 years old, and I looked down the hill, and I had this premonition. I was like, oh my God, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do these concerts. This is what I'm going to go do. And that year was the same year that Live Aid was launched. And then I saw Live Aid, and I've kind of always hated inequality. Like, Slough is a working class town. It's actually an overspill from London after the war. My grandparents and my parents got moved out during the war, the Second World War. And so we grew up in a kind of a working class town from when my grandparents moved there. And then I went to school in Windsor, which is a very affluent town. So we were always living between these two worlds, and I was always struggling with equality. I just felt like the world wasn't very equal. Then Live Aid came out, and then I had that premonition, and that was really what spawned my love for really using kind of live music, concerts for better or for good. That's the real seed of it. That's really where the whole thing started, really. That moment in that field at 13 years old, thinking, and then seeing Live Earth. And actually it was Tracy Chapman's performance, Live Aid, Tracy Chapman's performance and what was going on with apartheid that really, really drove me. I think still does today.
Yeah, that was an amazing, amazing event. And so speaking of music and events, can you tell us how that synergizes? How did that lead you to what you're creating at Planet Home? And more so, talk about how you're developing a platform for everybody to be, like you call it, a solutionist. And to quote you, and I got to read it, is to eat better, to make better, to move better, and live better, which is a lot of cool stuff. But how did that transition into that?
It's a bit of a journey, but so the seed sort of started really with sort of Geldof and Live Aid, and then this kind of notion that if I could put 350 people in a room on my own with no money and no resource, in the entire town couldn't put more than 1,500 people in there, could I do that, right? That's the kind of gem of it. Then obviously I was still at school. We also went through the Summer of Love in England in '88, and I actually became one of I actually was very heavily involved in the acid house scene in England, the rave scene in the '80s. And I became very engrossed in kind of promoting very large raves, and that was when it first started. And I just really sort of got to understand the experience that we were having as humans, and also how entertainment took you away from your everyday life. Like, you could escape for the weekend, and you could meet people from completely different backgrounds. And as long as you didn't get into the politics or the nonsense that was in the newspaper or what you were reading in your commercial world or your job, you were free. And so there was this freedom through the late '80s that I was very heavily involved in. And at the time, I actually thought I was going to go into photography and follow in my uncle's footsteps, who was, someone that I grew up really admiring. And I was 18, faffing around, trying to figure out what I was doing in life. And I'd been building sound systems my whole life, like as a kid. Didn't even know it was a job. I didn't know this was something you did as a career. And I got this prospectus for this university in London, City of Westminster. And I read it, and I accidentally found that engineering was a real job. And so I went to school for engineering. I then stayed in engineering for quite a long time in technical direction, specifically really enjoying the software, hardware side and the programming side. But at the heart of the whole thing for me was still driving equality and change. And I just stayed in that pathway, to be honest. And, I spent, 8 years in England cutting my teeth on building shows from theatre shows to rock and roll shows in club size. But at the heart of it was still equality. And in 19, the date this now, but I was really fortunate. I got to be honest, I've been extremely lucky. Royal Opera House was my first gig, in London, which doesn't get any better, to Cats, which was Andrew Lloyd Webber. So I got some very good training and thinking at a very early stage of my career. At the heart of it was still the love of music, and the heart of it was still love for change. I then got to do some work with Jimmy Page and Pat Cash in the 90s around a non-profit called Task Brazil. And a dear friend of mine, Chrissy Ferber, runs a very amazing company in England that's focused on large-scale events, specifically around like movie launches, and that, in London we have Leicester Square. It's where all the big stuff happens. It's like Times Square. And so I ran a venue right in the heart of Leicester Square, and I was doing show after show after show after show, and they were all high profile. They were all launches. I did Destiny's Child showcases. I mean, you name it, I was doing 60, 70 hour straight shows. And one year I got involved in this Task Brazil with Jimmy Page and Pat Cash, and Emily Cash, Pat's wife, and Jimino was Jimmy's Page wife at the time, to help them support this project called Scream. And I'd never actually thought I would end up doing a project like Live Aid, but it really was a mini Live Aid. I mean, it was Jimmy Page and friends in this 1,000 capacity club, and it was Steve Tyler showed up, the Black Crow showed up. I mean, you name it, Brian May showed up, and we had them all performing on this tiny stage in this club. And I was like, this is how we're going to change the world. This is it. And very quickly I learned after that performance and a few more shows that the cost of running a nonprofit was extremely high, and the sustainability of nonprofits was really low. And that no matter how much money we made building the schools, they were trying to build schools in Brazil at the time for this issue with these kids coming from the favelas, trying to rob the houses. And the story was that they were having security guards shoot these kids off the street. And I was horrified. I was like, oh my God, is that a real thing? I live in London. I've obviously got all the privileges. And again, it's equality, right? But what I learned very quickly was that the non-profit space was really challenged. They were not able to really monetize themselves the same way as we were in the for-profit side. And actually, the truth is, all the work I did then in 1998 to 99 to learn about non-profits and try to figure out where non-profits were going wrong, or where the for-profits were going wrong, couldn't solve it. Didn't understand it at the time. I was too young. But it just didn't work. The business that I was in of entertainment was making so much money, but these non-profits were not able to figure out how to keep the lights on week, and they would have to kind of do more events and more fundraising. And it was just this paradox for me, like, how does that even work? And then that takes me many years down the road to where I am today. But that was the kind of second seed, which was really the Jimmy Page and Pat Cash stuff. And then 2000 comes around, and I was doing a lot of entertainment in London. I had a really good company that was doing a lot of shows in London, in England. And I'm working with this artist called Keisha White, and we're doing this tour. I'm working with a bunch of different acts, but specifically this young, amazing female singer, Keisha White. And she's going on tour with this band called the Black Eyed Peas from the US. And through a long story, I ended up becoming extremely good friends with all of the band. And they were brand new. They just literally, Where's Love had just come out. Fergie just joined the band. And it was a small crew. It was two managers, Seth and Polo, doing, all the heavy lifting and putting it together at a real fast pace. And, there's eight in the band, 4 band members and the 4 Ps that everyone knows. Yeah. Within 7 months of meeting them, I actually ended up joining them as the sort of production manager and touring, head of touring with Polo. And that took me for 8 years through a cycle of global touring. So it kind of started running entertainment in London and doing all these shows in London for really amazing people, to traveling the world from 2004 really to 2008, with the Ps on these kind of Wild West shows. So that took me on a really new journey, because they also had a non-profit, which they still do. It's called, Will has it now, it was called the Peapod Foundation at the time. And so I then got to see like all the sort of stuff I'd grown up seeing, which was Live Earth and you know, and how that was, so Live Aid and how that had transformed. We were doing shows in South Africa. I mean, Will was actually very progressively thinking. So was Seth and Polo, his managers, on Breaking Ground. So we were doing shows everywhere, you know, from Kazakhstan. We did these crazy tours, and I got to see firsthand every third world country. I got to see firsthand what was going on in the world. And it was just so much inequality.
Right.
And Will has such a great heart, and he's such a wise thinker. I mean, they all are. Tab, Apple, Fergie, are just amazing thinkers, and they were always trying to fix equality because they all had tough upbringings. Like Apple, the app came from the Philippines, and he's actually still one of my biggest inspirations. He came from Philippines and got to the US, and they built this, you know, Tab's the same and Fergie's the same. Like, I was so inspired by what I learned from them guys. But we played a show in South Africa for the Peapod, and it was very much in line with Live Aid. It was just one of these moments, and I was like, we can do this, you know, we can change the world for music. Mm-hmm. And then in 2007, what actually really started Planet Home was in 2007, Al Gore and Tony Wall launched Live Earth. And Live Earth, of course, was this idea. It was like the same concept as Live Aid, but it was really to help fix the planet. And as much as I'd been on this quest to do good in the world, and I couldn't figure out how my professional world was still very high, and my non-profit world was still at the bottom of the wave, right? I couldn't get them to equal. It wasn't working. Like, I was trying, and I now realize I was putting no time into my non-profit work. I thought I was, but I think it was feeling my soul, but it certainly wasn't doing anything. The sort of change for me was 2007. We were at the Grammys, and Al Gore asked the Peas to perform at Live Earth in London. And so that year we went and played, I think it was June, July, we went and played at Wembley Stadium, which is for me, my home territory. And to me is the Mecca, right? I mean, that's where it all started. Like, that's where my dream started as a kid. And the fact that I'm now, you know, the producer of the Peas tour, and I'm now producing the show at Wembley Stadium, for me was a big milestone. But what I learned was that week was that the challenge wasn't moving the people. The challenge was the amount of money the oil companies had and the amount of money corporates invested in fucking up our planet. And it was a paradox again, because I'm like, oh, what I thought we could do, and I thought we were going to do at Live Earth, and what I thought Tony Wall and Al Gore we had to get done, it seemed impossible. It seemed that we were stuck behind this kind of big wall of corporate money and advertising and marketing. And no matter how much we moved the people, no matter how much marketing we put into it, no matter how much good we could do, we were at the bottom of the wave, and the oil business was at the top of the wave, and it just didn't seem feasible. And I remember thinking about Will talking about this on stage in front of 60,000 people. And I was like, what the fuck? And at that time, there was an organization which I always forget the name of. I get it wrong. It's shelved now, but I think it was called the Whole Earth Org List. And Paul Hawken and a bunch of other people, and it was a book I read back then, had tried to organize all the nonprofits in environmental space to help them come together and to give them a movement. And so you had Live Earth, you had thousands of people and organizations working on it. I was very new to learning about this, and I was just puzzled. I was like, okay, so Live Aid didn't work. Live Earth is not working. This is, you know, over that 2-3 years, what are we going to do? And in roll forward now to 2012, this is 5 years on, I'm still not really in the environmental world. I'm just reading about it, and I'm just learning about it, and I'm, you know, like a kid at first grade. And 2012 comes along, and I was sort of struggling a little bit. At that point, by the way, by 2012, I'm doing the Peas, I'm doing Rihanna, I got Lady Gaga, I've got now actually 2010, I moved to work for Jay-Z and Desiree Perez and Jay Brown at Rock Nation and Tata. And so 2010, and now 2010, by the way, I'm like at Yankee Stadium doing Jay-Z and Eminem. So like, this keeps going, my career keeps going, the wave keeps getting bigger, and the non-profits, still nothing. Can't figure it out. Like, how do I connect these worlds? How do I make one work with the other? And greater people like Tony Wall, who I such admire, have been doing this work for a lifetime. And so I guess I should just not do it, right? Because if they can't do it, I'm certainly not going to figure it out. And I read a book in 2012 called Abundance by Peter Diamandis and Stephen Kotler.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really focused on moving, so you know, from one space to another, like how do you move from security to abundance? I started to think about all the work Paul Hawken had been doing. He also started the drawdown, I think, around that time, or at least the concept for it. And I read this book and I was like, okay, so the problem is that we really haven't taken culture, the environment, technology, and economics and really built an equal balance of the four voices so that you could move together.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my take, the basic takeaway from the Abundance book. Anyway, 2012 through 2015, I carried on in the entertainment business. By 2013, my son came. And by 2014, 2015, I had no emotional capital left. And, you know, things started to slip for me in the entertainment business because I didn't have the love for it anymore. I wasn't in it like I was before. And I'd already moved on through different spaces. I was working on creative and direction and doing content. And I was moving for different content worlds because also at that point, we'd kind of lost traditional music business and we'd lost traditional record sales and content had changed a lot. So I started dabbling in like what I call complex technology media. So I did like a Super Bowl show for U2. I did the first ever live VR concert with Beck. We broke a lot of ground technology wise. And I was really fascinated on that crossover. So I was moving more into content at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just fascinated with how can we use culture to help fix the planet. And it was a fascination. I was reading and digesting. And then in 2016, through a really weird coincidence, I ended up meeting Stephen Kotler. And then I had this concept for what was back then creating equilibrium with another friend of mine, of really using the entertainment space and mixing that with the education space. So how can we use culture to sort of shift people into their behavior change? But then I don't know anything. So can I go round up, you know, 100 of the smartest people in the world and say, what should we fix? And that was really where it started. Like, how can I use the capital of culture with the wisest minds in the world and say, okay, if I ask 100 people what to fix, because I got no clue, and they could point to say, here's the 40 things you should fix. Could we then convince these 60,000 people in the stadium just to go fix them 40 things? And that was really the concept of Planet Home that really got workshopped out between my now partner, Gabrielle Hull, who I also met at the same time as Stephen. And she'd come from really finance and environmental space. Stephen had obviously come from Singularity University, was groundbreaking in his editorial, groundbreaking in his research, and another gentleman called Robert Suarez, who was actually the head of labs at Singularity. And we all sort of saw the world the same way. It was like, could we use, you know, culture capital with technology, with economics and the power of economics, and align them together with the environmental science so that there was a balanced point of view. And that was 2016. And we launched a version of Planet Home in 2017. And it was in Squaw Valley, which is where I am now. It was a test event and it went enormously well. I mean, I was still running my company at the time. I was trying to phase out of running entertainment and move working in purpose business full time. I didn't think I would actually be able to do it. And then after we launched that in 2017, I then actually produced a show in Korea, which is an interesting story. So at the same time as doing Planet Home, at Equilibrium at the time, which is now Planet Home in Squaw Valley, I was also producing a show for a car company called Genesis with my friend Mike Jerkovic and a bunch of others. And it was right at the time when Trump was going to war with the North Koreans. So I flew from England to Korea to produce that show right at the time when there was like missiles flying and no one would get on a plane to South Korea. And so 2017, I looked at that show and it was epic. I mean, we did great work. Gwen Stefani actually finally agreed to come out and save the show for us. And I was like, okay, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I just want to do this work. So I quit everything in 2016, 2017, and 2017, I was done. And 2018, we launched Planet Home as a full-time focus. So now I managed to finally find a way to put my non-profit work that I've wanted to do since I was 13 and what I really wanted to do in the world, together with the skill set that I'd built over the years on the culture side, with my sort of fascination advocacy, because I'm still a first grader in the environmental stuff. But, I think after 8 years, I think I've learned a little bit. But yeah, that's sort of how it all came around.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, there's the, we talked about the wave, there's the journey, there's a reason for everything to maybe have all that experience that's really going to help you be super successful with Planet Home. And I love the concept of there's 40,000 people there, and if each one does something, what can happen? That's a spectacular. I wouldn't even call it a concept. And people generally get emotional at a concert. You feel good, all the stuff that happens. So, taking the next step is, okay, I can make a difference now. Sounds like a fantastic way to go. Tell us how Planet Home is being, how you plan to use Planet Home, make Planet Home, bring solutionists forward to do that type of stuff.
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's another piece of the journey, actually, which was an inspiration. I was fortunate enough to work with Lady Gaga through a first span of her career as a tour director. And we played a show in London. So obviously Global Citizen now is a global brand, and they've done amazing work. Yeah. But before Global Citizen, there was a project run by a telecommunications company called Orange in England. And what they did was in order to get a ticket, you had to do some community work. And that was the first concept of how can we get people to do good in return for coming to see some content. And Gaga performed at that show in London, and she was, and she still is. I mean, she's a phenomenal human, one of the greatest hearts, by the way. And it's funny when you have such a big image, like people don't see the person underneath. She's a great person. She's just through and through, just a superhuman. And one of the things that I took away from that show in Orange was with Live Earth and Live Aid, what I hadn't seen happen was giving something tangible to the person to do, like a direct action that I could as an individual do. Right. And if I could do it, and then I could get my two friends to do it, and then we got 50,000 people in the room, then that's 150,000 people. That's how culture gets shifted, right? That's how we sell records. That's how we sell t-shirts. That's how advertising sells all the crap we don't need. And it's a real kind of foundational culture up, component, which is you start at the bottom of culture, you build your fan base, you build the people that believe in it, and then you build on top of it, and you never leave that core group of constituents. And I was like, what if you could get 50 people to be your core constituents? Or what if you could go on tour and you could get 50,000 people a night, to do that, and they walk away not just with the inspiration of the song and the moment and the separation of life and entertainment, but give them just a little gem of something, and something small. So we in 2019, what I wanted to do was take that concept of giving everyone something small to do and mix it with culture and wisdom. So we built, and we wanted to use more of the experiential, not instead of the concert business, because I was still struggling with how that sort of works, because I couldn't see people coming into something with just the culture piece without the education piece. What we did in 2019 was we actually took all these pieces and put them into a building in San Francisco. But I'll roll back. Actually, before that, one of the other things which was pretty obvious to me is like, if it's too complicated. So when you say biodiversity, we did 2017, we focused on a thing called mega linkages. Mega linkages is one component of the biodiversity issue. Just one component. The biodiversity issue is so big. If you were to try to break that down in a conversation, it's too complex. It's too much. It's too much for the brain, the cognizant load. And one of the things we stumbled upon when we were trying to build Planet Home was we didn't know how to communicate small actions to people that could lead them down learning journeys from one micro action to a macro change, or from one micro action to the learning that they would need to go on about that action. And I'm being a first grader, I had to break it down to explain it in so simple form. So actually myself, Robert, Gabrielle, in fact, a lot of us, a guy called Barry Chandler Williams, that's been on this from the beginning with us, is another actually music exec who has been helping us from the beginning, sat down and said, okay, we have to rethink about the SDGs. We have to rethink about drawdown. They're too complex. We can't adopt things in our everyday life that are too difficult. We can't move people from their daily habits to something they're just not going to do. You can't tell someone that lives on the beach to go fix, a soil issue in Iowa. You can't tell someone in Iowa to fix icebergs in Norway. And you can't ask me if I can't, it's like, if you can't quit smoking, don't ask me to go fix the planet, right? So we sort of came up with this idea of changing the framework of how we would communicate these planetary issues. And we built a planet home taxonomy, which is what you said earlier, which is like, how do we change the way we eat better for ourselves on the planet? How do we change the way we live better for ourselves on the planet? How do we change the way we make things better for us on the planet? And how do we change the way we move? And what we were actually able to do under Eat, Make, Move, and Live is actually move from that to a complex system. So there's a simple system for communication that moves you through a complex system. So if you go to the framework on the Planet Home platform, you have Eat, which covers food production security. So that's kind of how we get our food, right? And that's a big issue: food security, food delivery, supply chain management. And that really takes care of the science part. And then if you move through food production security, we have all the companies and all the organizations in the world working on it, all the solutions working on it that just deal with food production security. And that's more business to business. It's not a consumers facing thing. People don't really think about it. But what they do think about is things like ocean stewardship, which also comes into ease, all the things that we need to survive and thrive. Right. And then we have land stewardship, all the things we need to grow. This is a great eat less beef thing we do, which is like talking about methane gas from cows' asses. Like you can get from the fun stuff to the more heavy stuff, and then health and wellness. So what we did was we sort of thought about it from a scientific standpoint, because we have some amazing science and technology leaders like Neil Soda, Tom Chi, Amanda Ravenhill, the Buckminster crew that have been astronomical for us, like the science of it. And then mixing that with the culture of it, which is the Eat, Make, Move components. So you can really pick up a small action now, right? You can just eat less beef or keep there for a second. Then you can go to the framework. But now what we do is all of the research against that, you can go find. So you can pick up a small action, you can do a small action, but you can follow that through to the research, to the data. You can do it yourself. You don't need someone to tell you anything. We have what we call our subject matter experts available. So you can go speak to the experts yourself. You ask them yourself. There's no puzzle now, right? We wanted to demystify the science, give everyone access to it so they can make their own conclusions. So, them small actions, I think to your point, can make a change, but we have to stop pretending people are stupid. We have to stop treating people like they can't read. And we have to give them information in context, because when you take it out of context and you don't give them information in context, if you take two different disciplines, the gray area learning in the middle completely changes the fucking conversation. So, we got from Eat, Make, Move, Live, micro actions to macro actions to science to technology. And we kind of got that balance a little bit.
Man, I love it. So we're going to take a minute break here and then transfer to part two. Thanks.